to start learning about and discussing food insecurity than hearing directly from someone who has been food insecure. We're privileged to meet Mr. Trevor Goodchild. Trevor is an ACC graduate who has agreed to tell us his story of food insecurity. He has a remarkable story, and having come from food insecurity, he himself is deeply engaged in the community and works to help others. Trevor?
Hello, my name is Trevor Goodchild, and I'm going to share some of my experiences with food insecurity. So, I'll just go ahead and dive right in. Growing up, I never had to worry about food. My family wasn't upper class, we were lower middle class, but there was always food on the table. So, to quote Tupac, we had it rough, but we had enough. So, but that all changed when I was 16 years old. When I was 16, my father actually tried to kill me. As a result, I had to run and save my life by being homeless. So I ran off and I was on the streets for years. I was still going to high school. Now, see, my dad never got a high school diploma. He got a GED while serving time in prison, so I felt like I had something to prove. Even being homeless, I still went to high school every single day. And I was in extreme circumstances. I was living in a homeless shelter later on in my life. At that point, I was living in a cardboard box in an alleyway while still going to school, digging in dumpsters for food. And this food wasn't healthy. This was, bagels, which is like 10 loaves of bread or donuts, whatever I could find. It was a hellish existence. And then I went to school every day. And it was really an interesting phenomenon because I couldn't really share this. I couldn't open up with my classmates about what I was going through. A lot of these kids had, cars already, BMWs and Beamers, and I'm coming from an alleyway in a cardboard box. So I didn't want to burden them with, my story of struggle and strife. I didn't want to try to have that awkward conversation because I knew they wouldn't be able to relate, which just kind of goes to show you that you never really know where someone's coming from just by their appearance. You don't know if they're struggling with hunger, homelessness, strife, impoverishment. You'd have no idea. You can't always judge a book by its cover. So, I continued to go to school, and, I lived on free lunch, which was one meal a day, which was pretty good for a while, but there were other times I couldn't even go to school due to extenuating circumstances. So, it was really hard for a while. I learned a lot of valuable lessons from it. Around 19 years old, I managed to get off the streets. I got a job at Freebirds in the Hancock Center, and I managed to get my own place, but there was always this feeling that it was temporary, that I get sucked back into the streets, and that I would, lose my job tomorrow, and I wouldn't have money, I wouldn't have shelter, I wouldn't have food. So there was always that underlying fear there. So if you were to ask me, what are the factors that play into food insecurity? Why would someone have that? I would say not having support from my family. I would say being taught bad habits that instead of empowering me, actually jeopardized my ability to survive in real life situations. I would say not having a solid job skill set due to instability, the roller coaster ride of being hired and fired from so many different jobs. I spent years with that, which meant I didn't know if I was going to have money, didn't know if I was going to have food, didn't know if I was going to have the resources that I needed to survive. I was in this kind of permanent survival mode for so many years of my life. I was eager to prove myself. I wanted to prove, what my aptitude was at jobs. I wanted to prove how intelligent I was to employers, but proving how smart I was or over-proving how smart I was actually pretty stupid. It didn't go over with the 9 to 5 trying to outsmart the bosses, right? So I ended up losing a lot of jobs because I didn't have a skill set socially to get by due to the crazy circumstances of my previous life on the streets. So, also probably what really contributed is that I didn't learn as much in high school. I wasn't a valedictorian as maybe other kids did. Now, whether or not high school actually prepares you for real life, that's debatable. But what I could have learned, I didn't learn as much as I could have because I was in the tooth and nail struggle of my everyday life. So that's what I was focused on. High school was another barrier I had to get through on my path to stability. I had food stamps off and on, but it wasn't something I could really depend on. And I didn't understand how it was. Was it just the staff member that was working that day or not? I mean, there were such, times in my life where I qualified beyond a shadow of a doubt to have food stamps, but I was denied. So that wasn't something I could depend on as a resource to eliminate food insecurity in my life. So, when we talk about all these factors that led to having food insecurity, ultimately I would say it's being stuck in a cycle of poverty. I would say never having faith or confidence in myself and the government and the societal structures that I was supposed to be benefiting from. I was just really crippled in my ability to get by because of all the self-destructive patterns of behavior that I had learned while living on the streets. And while, in certain extreme circumstances, this might have helped. This might have helped me out when I was homeless, but transferring those habits, that survival mode that I was constantly in, once I was living on my own, actually did the opposite of helping me out and hurt me in my ability to have stability and sources of food through money, shelter, all this kind of stuff. So now, conversely, if you were to ask me, what would have led to a better experience? If you asked me, what would have helped you reduce food insecurity? I would say, aside from support, should have brought a coffee up here. Aside from support from my family, I would say life skills training. That would have been really helpful. Probably professional help as far as counseling goes when I was in high school. I mean, the high school counselors were great, but they weren't equipped to deal with what I was going through. So I would say also consistency and stability in my personal life. Now, certain factors you can't really mitigate because that's just how life happens. It's the roll of the die. I would say having access and knowledge to all the sources of free food in Austin, which ironically I know more about now than I did when I actually needed it. And I would say being aware of who I was outside my own perspective would have been huge. So I mean, picture this. We go through life and our day-to-day experiences. It's kind of like Dorian Gray, right? We're stuck in this painting. We don't ever step outside the painting to see ourselves in context of our life objectively. We don't actually get a chance to see, thank you, ourselves, from another viewpoint, right? So, if I had been able to do that, I could have probably strategized when I was on the streets, Okay, so there's this resource of food here. There's that resource of food there. And I could have probably provided for myself a lot better, but I was stuck up in this violent struggle every single day of how to get by. I couldn't think clearly. So, let's fast forward, right? I entered Austin Community College in 2008, and I loved it. It was the high school experience I never had because I was too busy struggling with homelessness, hunger, strife. So I dived full in. I became a supplemental instruction leader. I helped lead private classes in the Learning Lab for students that struggle with traditional subjects like Comp 1, Comp 2, history, and things like that. I became a member of the Honor Society for Phi Theta Kappa, as well as the Leadership Society, and I became a reporter for the Accent newspaper, which was fantastic. They put us up in hotels in other cities to compete in national journalist competitions like the Texas Intercollegiate Press Association, or TIPA. So, ACC was the family I never had in certain ways. And I'm still in contact with a lot of the professors that I took classes from and TA'd from, like Professor Leidick, who I helped out with his Comp 2 classes, and his wife, Dr. Susan Leidick, who I helped out with her Comp 1 classes doing supplemental instruction. And that was part of how I found out through another professor, David Lauterbach, Dr. Lauterbach, I should say, who let me know about this event. So, if we're going to move on to what it's like now, post-homelessness, what it's like post the homeless life, I would say one of the greatest gifts that adversity gives you, if you have the right perspective, is you now have the ability to see on a level that you couldn't before. Not on television, not from a third-person perspective, but first-person narrative. To be able to really relate to people that don't know when their next meal is going to come. I can relate to people that are in that struggle for food security now in a way that my classmates never could when I was homeless going to high school. So that's part of what made me want to volunteer at the Arch, at the food bank, work with Casametta Ganella. Also, I got involved in the local community, being a public speaker at the state capitol, the Human Rights Commission at City Hall, working with issues regarding the East Side community in relationship to the APD, police brutality, as well as taser laws and things like that. It got me really motivated to get involved, to make a difference. Now, if you were to ask me, why is there food insecurity? Why does that even exist? I think ultimately it really comes down to the fact that we have a system that demonizes people that are suffering from these issues of food insecurity rather than examine the root causes of why we have a society where someone never has to wonder when the next meal is going to come. So if anyone has any questions right now, I'd be happy to open that up for a Q&A. No, but that sounds awesome. She asked if I'd ever worked with schools that teach life skills training, and I have not. I think it would be, right? We live in a society right now where what's the number one governing aspect is economics, but how many people who aren't majoring that know about economics? Take Native American societies, right? What ruled that society? Hunting and gathering. You couldn't ask a youth that wouldn't know about hunting and gathering if you asked their youth there in that society. Nowadays, our society is ruled by economics, but how many people really know what are the driving factors behind that? So I think learning about those type of life skills going out into the job market would be really useful. Learning about social skills in high school if you're not specifically majoring in that with sociology.
Sorry. Do you think that there's a reason that students aren't being taught these important life skills that they're going to need later in their lives?
Well, I mean, look at some of the textbooks. Some of the textbooks that we have in secondary education go back to the 1800s in certain areas of America. You know, it hasn't really evolved with the times. When you look at the didactic interaction between students and teacher, more often than not, you're going to find the more you are an empty receptacle to just fill up with knowledge and recite back and regurgitate back, the better suited you are. But what about critical analysis? What about helping education evolve with the student's participation, right? I think there's a stagnation there as far as education is concerned, that if we close those gaps, we would find these ways to do that, where we could customize education a little more individually to each person versus just kind of one size fits all, because we're not all alike. Yes, sir. Okay.
You said that your students didn't know what your struggle was. Did your counselors know?
Yes, some of the counselors at my high school understood what I was going through, and in fact, when I got my first apartment off the streets, my principal gave me a Hamilton Beach blender. One of my counselors gave me an end table. I got a bed. I got furniture from the staff of my high school, which is Gonzalo Garza Independence High School.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, students who maybe didn't have the courage to speak out, what are some ways that they could have been identified?
That's a really good question, because the part of my experience really taught me is that you never know where someone's coming from by just what they look like or how they act, you know. I would say it'd be nice where if there was encouragement in schools for maybe like a once a week session with a counselor at school just to say, hey, how's life going, right? That might really help out.
So a lot of my sort of investigation of poverty and food insecurity, it seems like there's problems with institutional structures and support, but a lot of it comes from social isolation, and your story seems to echo that. I also was just reading recently that 14% of community college students are experiencing homelessness and food insecurity. So I wonder what your thoughts are on overcoming that side and what people in this environment can do to help connect people to the resources.
What is the most popular thing in the world right now? What is everyone connected to? Social media, Facebook, right? Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. I can't get on all that stuff. I can't deal with the Twitter limitations for comments. I'm very verbose. But I would say having a network where a lot of these institutions that help out from that aren't really up to date. They don't have websites. They don't have the kind of networking together with social media. Right now, I used to work for Facebook for this past year. I've quit my job and I've started my own company for social media management. And this is what I do. I help people out with social media and run ads for businesses and things like that. So I'm kind of super into that. But I think as far as connecting the dots together and connecting the gaps, you know, there are homeless people I've seen on the drag. They have smartphones and dogs, and they're asking for change. Well, if they have smartphones, you know, they probably have phone service, and they probably have a Facebook account, right? But what if there was a Facebook page for Austin Resources for Food? I don't know if there is. I haven't looked for one. But having that presence, I mean, digitally now is how word of mouth spreads. So I think that would be great, something like that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for sharing. I could relate on different levels. I'm curious to whether it impacted your academics, because when that happened to me in high school, it went from a 3.7 to below a 2.0, and I feel like building on your question, like how do we identify is, you know, how do teachers and counselors respond to the significant change in our academic performance? So I don't know if that happened with you or.
It did. I spent 5 years graduating high school because a lot of that, I was going through a lot of crazy stuff. I wasn't going to school. I was in jail for stuff that got dismissed when I was jumped by like 4 people in the homeless shelter I was staying at. So that took away from time in school. A lot of stuff took away. More often, it was just like, how do you prioritize something like school when you're dealing with real life problems as a teenager? You know, it's really hard to see that as important. Now, of course, hindsight's 2020. Now I can see, okay, long-reaching, looking at earning potential of people with college degrees versus high school diplomas. You know, there's going to be more, right? But I couldn't see that or the value in that as someone that went to high school, right? I mean, I think maybe something like that would be good, is to associate value with that. Because what's one of the common things you hear about people that aren't good at math? I'm not good at math. Well, how am I going to use this in the real world? How am I going to use algebra or trigonometry or something like that? I don't care about this. Well, connecting that to careers, connecting that with lifestyles, connecting that with your opportunities that you have available, maybe would add value to that as a motivating factor for why people should do well in high school, to transfer into college, to transfer into maybe a trade school or anything that suits their passion and interests. I think that would really help. Yes, sir?
So I just want to say I also relate to your situation, not on some levels, but my question, I guess, is through your whole experience when you were like in high school and stuff like that, did you ever like talk to or like see any of your classmates, and like, I don't know, through your whole experience, did you ever just feel like that really you like humbled yourself and became more wiser compared to like the people in your classroom who were every day like talking about things like, just weren't on the same level of thinking that you were on, because you went through some stuff, just some real stuff. So do you ever feel like sometimes your classmates or people around you are just really ungrateful, or just how did you start to see people different on the way they would kind of act on things, or the way they would speak?
You're really on point with that. So everyone's, as I put in a recent rap song I wrote a couple days ago, everyone's struggle to themselves is the worst, right? And it's important to be humble. I was entitled like a bee when I was a teenager, because I was like, man, y'all don't know what it's like. You don't know what I'm going through. You're complaining about a broken nail. I'm digging in dumpsters for dinner. You have nothing. But the thing with that is, although that may have been true, they were simply a product of their parents and their environment, just as I was at that point in my life. And so this sense of entitlement that I carried with me like a chip on my shoulder throughout my life really did more harm than help. It was only when I really started to embrace compassion and be more compassionate towards other people, even if I thought on a side-by-side comparison they have no idea what real struggle or strife is, to them it was, right? And we're all stuck right inside that painting where we don't get to see that context of ourselves objectively in relation to everything else in our life. So yeah, it was really hard having to hear people complain about how tough their life was, overprivileged kids talking about how bad that life is. You know, I mean, I had a whole bunch of that, but it was part of growing up. I had to let go of that. And when I let go of my resentment of other people for having more than I did, my life changed for the better. Thank you so much for your time and compassion. And I'm just going to wrap this up by saying I'm really happy and honored to be a speaker here, and I think what they're doing is great stuff. So, you know, if you are interested in a career along these subject lines, you can make a difference in life because, you know, it's like, would you rather be rich or have a whole lot of respect?